Come on out to Mississauga, it's the greatest place around. Where on a quiet evening you can watch the sun go down. And if you should need a friend, there are plenty to be found. That's why everybody loves that good old Mississauga.
Hello, and thank you for joining us here on Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. Please send in your questions to history@heritagemississauga.org as we explore the fascinating stories of Mississauga together. Like, subscribe, and follow us and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. As part of this program, we will be exploring memories, moments, and milestones from the past 50 years with past and present civic leaders for the City of Mississauga's 50th anniversary. On this week's episode, we are thrilled to be joined by former City of Mississauga Councillor David Culham as we explore his personal perspectives of moments and milestones for the City of Mississauga's 50th anniversary. Thank you, Dave, for joining us here. Longtime city councillor, longer roots to the city, I know. Although you've been abroad before that. What are your roots? What are your connections to the city of Mississauga?
Well, I'd come out here early because of my then wife and family. Their parents were here, over near Dixie Road. So I'd come up and seen the orchards and other things, walk through them. But when our first daughter, then our son, we needed a place. And so like a lot of young people moved to Mississauga in 71.
71, okay.
And, but I found later there was an article in the paper in 1974 about me relating to the Prices.
Yeah.
And I really wasn't related to the head of the militia. It was his brother,
Right.
John. But it was James Culham, my great-great-grandfather, who had 500 acres under what is now Pearson International. Yeah. And my family, my great-grandfather was David, and he and his brother married two Price girls who were established family here, and they moved up to Floss Township. And now there's a Culham Avenue on one of the farm because in 1874, they had 200 acres. And that was eventually split, and my grandfather took half and so on. So I had this connection. But then when I came down, there were family here. There's another David Culham from Mississauga,
okay.
who's 10 years younger. And I had to go, my eye specialist sent me to an optometrist. And she called me on a Saturday morning. She said, well, are you David Culham? I said, yes. 1952. I said, no, I'm 42. That must be the other David who comes to my picnic and so on. And delightful family he has. So I rediscovered them. And then there was the other one that became a aeronautical engineer that worked for Avro. And he was involved in all of that thing. And of course his family, and they've moved back up to Gravenhurst, but I'm in touch with them. So it was broadening for me to discover these people and relate to them. It was initiated really by David's father, Errol, who was a builder in town, and he built quality homes and then tried to do an apartment in Port Credit that he almost went mad over because there's levels of building. But I related back to them, and I've discovered where they were, where the farm was, and so on.
Did it bring an attachment to this place, even though you're a newcomer to find these roots?
Oh yes, yes, because there was a church they were related to, and that church eventually, that area was again expropriated, so they moved the whole thing over into Etobicoke.
Okay. So
James Cemetery is there on Royal York, and but my family, David Culham, went north.
Okay.
And so that's why I come from the Simcoe County area.
Okay. But you arrived in 1971.
Yes.
You buy a house for a growing family in 71. What are your memories from that time? I mean, we're looking back at the 50. You're on the cusp of the city coming to be, so you're moving into the town of Mississauga.
And become the city and on the first council, which was, I didn't think of it at the time. Didn't think of a lot of things when I was 31 years of age, like Dobkin. But I think I'm married to that now, that whole thing, because I've seen the city grow and prosper and meet the challenges, different groups meeting the challenges. Um, so but when you're a newcomer to a place, you also relate to other newcomers.
Right.
So that's how I got into the ethnic groups. And in every case, I studied their backgrounds. With the Greeks that I'm Kumbarsa, the best man, the Greeks. I can't pronounce it properly. But I learned their history, and it deepens your life. But not most of the people that come want to integrate into the Canadian fold. A lot of activists are going in other directions. And I relate to that because you relate to people of the same values, but they're the same values that come out of different cultures.
Right.
It's just a different expression. So once you see that in a person, you have this connection for life. And so Louis Balan of the Orchard Restaurant, and now by his son, Tommy, you have that connection that's deep. I've had to work hard because of setbacks. I couldn't walk 3 years ago. I had to learn to walk again. And I still have the cane at the front door to remind me of where I've been.
Right.
Well, I do the same in terms of the city. It's been a long journey, and I hope the journey continues along past me with successful young people coming on board. So I watch the young councillors very closely. I rarely criticize publicly. I give them a fair little bit of advice in the back room.
Right.
And I wish them all well.
I was going to say it is a perspective. I mean, we're focusing on not only this interview, but a lot of times this year on the 50th anniversary of the city. But it's not an end chapter, right? It's not the end of the story. This is but a chapter of the story.
Many chapters.
Many chapters. When you look back, I mean, you're at the cusp of Mississauga not only becoming a city, but now you have a hand in it, right? You're on that first council, but you this evolution not only of the city while you're on council, but you go from being the young guy on the block to the veteran on council by the time. Like you had a long duration on council.
Yeah, I retired at 58 from the council.
Yeah, but you started at 31.
Exactly. Well, actually, I started at 30 because I had to do door knocking, and I did a lot of it and lost about 15 pounds doing it. Because once you engage, if you're athletical, there's no excuse to not win.
Right. And
you work hard at it. And even when the dogs come at you and you bury your hand in their throat as they're biting you, you keep going. And hopefully people will give you a glass of water. But I lost 15 pounds in that election.
The first one?
The first one, yeah. And it took me a lot of, because if you do it right, it's so demanding.
Right.
More demanding than it should be. But you sacrifice a lot of things, and your family sacrifice a lot of things.
Right.
And those things are still on my mind 50 years later.
I can imagine just speaking to some of your former colleagues as well, just the countless evenings that you're not at home, right? Because you're out in the community, you can be at ratepayers groups
Well, when I went back in 1980, for 81, I should say, I thought I'd limit myself to 2 days, 2 nights. And Mark Marlin kind of about being out there and doing things. And once she left council, I realized I had to pick up some slack and go to things that she would have gone to that no one else was going to. And but I used to do talks at Rotaries on the Valley, and I'd have 2 sets of slides from the air that I had taken. The Conservation Authority paid a flight for me to go up and with the director and general manager, and I took air photos. Well, those were candid shots that weren't available because you have to get permission to fly below 1,000 feet. And so I used those to sell the idea of a naturalizing valley. But the motion that went through was in May of 1974. So when I came in January, it was supposed to be just a ceremonial meeting. I had a motion to take back the development that was on the golf course on Dundas, and was successful. And then I got them to agree to what is there today instead of 4 12-story apartments.
You came ready to work. You
I
showed up to
came,
work.
yeah, and my background was in planning, but also resource economics and so on. I happened to teach. I knew how to speak in public.
Mhm.
You take 36 kids, and if you keep them tamed, you're partly a lion tamer. So I was never intimidated with
Teachers are
public.
underrated for their skills at a
Exactly.
crowd
Well,
control.
especially, the kids knew I had a voice that would break eardrums if they were out of order. But it's public meetings were my forte all the way through, and I had plenty of them. And then out of that, of course, we did 19 plants a year with volunteers. So you go up the valley, you see what we planted those, and we planted, and I bet you the ex-students do the same. That I was part
They'll
of that.
remember the
Yeah. And so really that was May. And another thing that happened that May, I was going to committee of adjustment to stop a development on the golf course, and I got stopped. Had to go to the Antarimus Bore, and we did that too. But that was a huge rain. So we had 6 and some odd inches of rain in a few hours, and the central traffic circle in Credit Woodlands flooded over.
Oh, Lord.
And a Volkswagen flooded right out into it because they had a sealed bottom, and I got them deeper into it. No, that I knew what I had to do because I'd studied conservation authorities.
Right.
And so it happened. And when I came back, I was off for 4 years. I came back in 1980 for 81. They weren't doing it right. So I put an objection, planning objection, in on a development north of Britannia. The planners came and asked and sat down with the developers, and they agreed to give up that land, which was the terrace.
Mhm.
Later on, there was an OMB decision on a terrace in Brampton, and Peter Allen, the then planner, who had the gravitas to be significant at the planning board, we won on that, and it didn't happen. But because it hadn't happened in Mississauga, on some of the Credit Woodland terraces, there was actually development like Mariah Court.
Right.
But no, that's something I was involved with. I'm very proud as time goes on. And it was recognized then in the naming of the trail.
Yes, Culham Trail.
Because it was to be a naturalizing valley rather than a whole series of parks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, after 2000, they actually named their study of the valleys the parks, and they took that off eventually with my criticism. But I was critical of the report and what they were suggesting because they lost the concept of a linear trail. They came in with all kinds of them. But the councillors have and shortages of cash to blow on these things has helped. And in fact, I've been involved in north of and east of Credit View because that one's got off on the trail and through the pandemic, but George Carlson helped me with it. And we got that back on, and they've added, of course, a bridge across to the east side, and that will allow more people to come in. And of course, there's the trail to go north, which we now own much of the land, but there's still those farms that are there that need to be worked on.
I picture like you as a counselor, but just this long-term vision for things. Like as you build the Culham Trail is a wonderful creation in our city.
Well, it works even on Etobicoke Creek. All of the places we took from top of bank, and we started measuring it and started taking it as a dedication. So it affected the whole city.
Yeah.
I was very pleased to be part of Dobkin's vision of open space on the waterfront, which really he led, and Hubert Wolf was very much a part of that as the councillor.
Yeah.
But the 76 council included the Woodlands, the Credit Woodlands woodlot, which was significant to me, Cawthra Elliott, the Adams Estate, Rattray, and of course, what is now the Bruckner was part of that. And I'd forgotten that when I was working at the Bruckner, and I had to look it up, and and because it was odd deeds that were there.
Cranberry Cove, I think it was called.
Cranberry Cove. And I came back in 81 when they were bumping these people off it because they still had residents there. And I like to transition over time. the fact that we got that land, and this is what Dobkin is very proud of, and rightly so, is that that is the backbone of open space today.
Yes.
Taking the valley wasn't part of what he thought, but we got all the valley. And I got a number of owners to donate land. And that has been significant. Murray Elia gave, they called him Elias, but it was Elia. He gave land after we bought the woodlot. He donated land. And of course, when I first met Air Mills Parkway, Air Mills Development in 1983, I met with them and they donated 46 acres in the valley, which completed the road up to Eglinton. But it's but when I came back in 81, I had thought about it. I had studied graph theory in university, and that led me to think that if you can't get through the intersections, you can't go anywhere. You can build 6 lanes, but nothing. So I initiated computerized traffic signals, and I thought that it would help us smooth out the construction of roads if we went to certain areas. But when they did the study, which I had initiated, they found that really instead of 15% improvement on capital works, it would be a 30%. Well, then everybody went for it. But it took us 5 years to implement it. But that has revolutionized things. So every time I go through intersections, and I'm looking at how it's going, but that was my baby. And I'm very proud of it. And the staff was very much behind it.
Right.
Then, of course, Blue Box, I started with the recycling.
I remember that.
I've done all of the things, but we did the first curbside when I came back in 81.
Yeah.
And it was hard to get it going. I think 84, I had 84 tons for the year. And so I started bringing it into Public Works, which I chaired, every month. And we sat down, and it came to me when I was going into these parades, promoting it, that the drivers didn't get any money out of it and had no incentive, and there was no communication with the owners and the drivers.
Okay.
But because they actually had a truck coming in for me, I have a picture of 84 in a parade in Streetsville. The drivers, I got the owner to dedicate the money they got from the newspaper, because there's only newspapers initially, and the drivers got on board. So we went from 84 tons a year, and I set the target of 1,000 for 85. We did 1,200 tons, and then I set a target for 86 with 2,400, and we met that as well. But the first month of Blue Box, we did over 2,000 tons. So we then had glass as well as paper. But we ended up and cans.
Yep.
But later we got going with plastics.
Yep.
And that
you had 2 different bins, I remember. You had a plastic bin and a cardboard newspaper bin.
Now they've moved on to other ways of doing it, and that's fine. But it certainly set it. And I always used to say, if we're paying less per Blue Box than we are for ton of garbage in the dump, then we're ahead of the game. Mm-hmm. I debated right across the province. I took on the mayor of Kingston one time, and she capitulated. I was invited by an engineer from Sudbury to speak to the municipal engineers. And I asked the question, how many are Blue Boxing? They would put up all their hands. And I said, how many are going to be cremated? There were only 3 of us. I said, I see a lack of commitment to recycling. And they all laughed, but it made the point that recycling is a way of life, but not to be maudlin or virtue signaling. It has to be practical. Yeah.
So when you reflect back, I mean, we've talked about the lighted or the traffic light signals, but the evolution of the city in the space, if you will, the landscape itself. You have lived through the most enormous change the city has ever gone through, and you've been part of that in terms of decision making and guiding the ship. Are there things that you really stick out into your mind that this was a significant development because that helped shape the city? Like whether it could be City Hall, it could. I mean, you were here when Square One would have opened. But is there something that sticks out, or multiple things that stick out in terms of that geographic development of the city that really
Well, I
kind of
think
shaped the
we
place?
accepted the idea of intensification. Though
Okay.
Doc Martin had a real thing on for apartments because he didn't think that's where families should be raised. And there's a great deal about that, but you have to design that. But I think we've taken that on. But the challenge today for this council and the future councillor is to make sure that density comes in a form that is acceptable. I think my feeling is that this council, while kind of, let's say, fair for a while, are finding their discipline in how to do that. They're looking with scrutiny. I can see the Ward 1, Ward 2. I see it in my area. The councillors are looking at these in a critical way as to what future that's going to bring. And I see that as a very good sign.
Is that something you did as a councillor?
I did that deeply, more so than they, but I think I'm looking at what's happening. I see that awareness in them, and it's good for me.
Right.
That that's a gestalt, that's a ha-ha thing,
Right.
and they know they have to watch that and not go along. They have to work hard at making sure the planners have that space well planned. And I go along and I see these specially carved plans in front of a condominium townhouse, and they have every townhouse shown as you come to the street.
Yeah.
Well, that was something I specifically did.
Yeah.
And it's not always done, but you see it, and some of them take it to, beautifully carved.
Yeah. Beautiful maps, if you will.
But when you come in, you can see the whole community and how it relates to the open space around it.
And was that designed intent for that idea of building community?
Oh, yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yes. Well, and we used to, because as a teacher, I used a lot of overlays and
Yeah.
maps.
Yep.
We started that in planning in 74, and the planners took off with it. So every meeting, everybody in the room saw the plan.
Right.
That didn't happen before 74 and before that initiation.
Always good to have the index, right? When you read the book.
But you can't visualize, like, you're not part of the process, but anybody who goes to a planning today
Right.
is part of the process because they see what the staff, and of course, they probably have a copy of the plan.
True. Now, this question could be an endless one. Forgive me. You've been in public life for a long period of time and connected to this community for a long period of time. What are some of the organizations or clubs that you've been involved with that kind of, in your mind, had a hand in raising the identity of the city or raising the...
Airedale Little League was
Really?
something. I had to deal with traffic throughput in 74, and we instituted something that was out of character with the province and so on. When I came in 74, a stop sign had to be approved by the province. I got that ended. They had to have the documentation, but we did a stop sign thing to cut, and we reduced the throughput and the speeding by that. There's been a modification a year or two ago, but other than that, that's from 50 years ago.
Oh, well.
And we started applying that across the city. Then they got into bumps, speed bumps, and slowing traffic down, and that's been carried on.
Now they have traffic cameras in schools.
Yes, and I think I was involved deeply with opera. Not that I'm a great opera lover, but I love opera singers, I guess. But I got involved and on their board, and eventually I went off because I could be better to fund them if it wasn't an agency I was involved in. The Neighborhood Watch was something I was deeply involved with very early, because a student of mine, a former student in London, was murdered in London, Ontario.
Wow. And
it sparked the first Neighborhood Watch in Canada. So I was aware of that even when I was a student and then when I was a teacher. And so I was involved in the first Neighborhood Watch here in Mississauga. I don't know how it's doing now. But I then got involved with, because it was housing my ward, I got deeply involved with the Wisma mega group, which is Indonesian. I'm 30 some years later, I'm still going to all their functions. The ethnic groups is my richest experience, I think.
Yeah.
It's deep in me. Whenever I start to feel negative about a group that's demonstrating or something, I try to think back to a better thought process rather than anger. But they, all of the people have enriched the city by their culture, not by their politics, but by their building community.
Yeah.
The churches, the Gurdwaris, the mosques, they all add a sense of place to people.
Think of all
And
the
so
cultural festivals too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm still going to them, though I go to less, I only go where there's a personal attachment with people.
Yeah.
And Victor O will be there. I was very proud that he was the first senator from Mississauga. We had worked together on community things. We became very close friends. I think he did a spectacular job in Ottawa. He's now retired from
Yep.
that. But I was very proud of his appointment. There's sports groups in particular. That's where the volunteerism and usually with your children, people are volunteering.
Yes.
You have to have volunteers in the city. To run a city, you have to have a lot of time and attention to the little things before big policy works.
Right.
If you're only at this large level, all you get is word salads, but you get meaningful text if you're down at that grassroots level and seeing how that aggregates up to the larger city. We really live in villages and cities, and the villages have to work. So you have to make the villages work. And you big city, we're a big city, but we have to make our villages work. So Port Credit and Streetsville, but all the others are
A village,
happening.
a village in this doesn't mean the historic villages. It means those community level places.
Yeah.
Right? When we've talked about a lot of, first of all, hat tip to all the volunteers. The city, the volunteers, the heartbeat of the city, right?
Absolutely.
When you look at your time with the city and over not only your time as councillor, but a resident here as well, the people that you've interacted with, they have to be countless and beyond count. But are those, you talked about Senator O, are those that stick out in your mind that really help shape an identity for Mississauga, like individuals?
Well, my personal thing is with Ed Halliday, who was the recreation director or commissioner.
Yeah.
And when I came in, and then when I was off, he became the chief administrative officer. And all the way through my, 23 years of 25, he made things happen.
Right.
And
also one of the founding directors of Heritage Mississauga.
Good point. A tremendous quality person. And I remember I've got a picture of him, and there's 6 of us. We were doing a public walk out of Arundel. And it was 87, I guess, and I had just taken over that part of the city. I had my fingers into it before, but first it was my ward then. And
the ward boundaries had changed.
Yes.
That's it, yeah.
And mine had become shifted more north. And Ed was there.
Right.
Here's the city manager. He's there. And he had been involved way back in the 70s in putting money aside to start the park. And nothing happened when I was away, but he was prepared to move when I came back. And he was there. So we had a picture taken. A tornado, tremendous winter blizzard came on.
Okay.
So most people didn't walk further out of the park and up to the cliff. We had sent a young reporter, a photographer up, and forgot about him. and there's only
at a blizzard.
And there's only 6 of us. 2 of us still alive. Bob Semenuk is one in the picture that's still alive, and me. And this guy's coming back frozen from Burnthorpe, and he takes our picture. There's only 6 of us. It was old. It had turned hugely cold and snow blowing and everything. So here's this picture. And later in the 90s, I was doing a big walk up in Meadowville Village, and about 200 people came out. And I had worked arrangements to go across the farmers' fields. And he had turned down others, but he agreed, one farm boy to another. And Ed Halliday's in the picture.
Okay.
And so I wanted to do something about him. I've got a collage of pictures with him in it. But he is the model to me of a civil servant, dedicated, bright, less verbose than other people, but a man of action.
Right.
But his ego, very small, getting things done and helping people. And I don't think I could have done the Valley and the other things without that help that was behind the scenes, that you're young and you're full of yourself, but you're not aware these other people behind the scenes helping. We had a lot of that in the Mississauga in staff. So he was one. Hazel was always huge in my mind, both good and bad. Challenging, she'd call you at 6 in the morning when you were half asleep, and that was her game. But homework, do your homework.
Yeah.
And I did. And we battled. But I loved her ground. The good in her was tremendous. And I really loved that in her. And when I was retired, I'd retired from the board, she asked if I would go on the transit authority for the province as the regional rep. And I did, because for whatever happened, and does happen between you, because politics enlivens all the fears that people had, and she had a strong sense of paranoia. I never ever wanted her job, but some people thought I did. And but she's big in the mind of people, but I knew her in the back room. I knew her, some of her best speeches were in camera.
Right.
And I'm moved by, even when I think of her.
So that's a good segue into, we could spend hours and hours looking back, and I suspect that's not a bad thing. But we are here in the 50th anniversary of the city, and we're celebrating the milestone that this is, and we should. Mississauga's got a fascinating story, I think. But if you could prognosticate, if you could look forward to the next year, the next 50 years for the city, is there something you see coming, or an opportunity that awaits Mississauga that you'd like to see come to fruition for the city?
Well, I think that we need to reconnect with Arundel College.
Okay.
In the early years, we were very much connected with the principals. They lived here. They took part in the community. And you can set research things, and the city has so much going on that young students could get involved with, but we're not as connected. I don't even know who the principal is right now. Certainly I haven't seen it. Now, granted, I'm 82 and I'm not out and about as much, and when I am, I don't make waves. But Hazel connected to that, even though she wasn't university bound, she saw the merit in it.
I wanted to touch on, and I know we chatted about it, but I really wanted, to me, this is one of those gems in this crown of the city. We are looking back at 50 years. It's very much you're tied to the creation of it or the evolution of it. And it's still part of our city and one of those treasured spaces. I'm wondering if we can talk about it here, just to make sure that we kind of celebrate it. And that's Bruckner Rhododendron Gardens. Near and dear to your heart. You are one of the few people that I know that knew Dr. Bruckner.
We became very close friends. I had gone back on the Conservation Authority, and he was there with his son, also Dr. Bruckner. And it was going nowhere, and nobody was in. And I saw the need. It was in Cooksville Creek. So I got it turned around, and we became good friends. And then I realized, looking over his things, that you're 80, and what are you going to do with these rhododendrons? You're not going to get someone to buy this house and do it. Find a place. So he looked up what is now Bruckner Rhododendron Garden, and he saw the microclimate was good. So I said, approach Harold Kennedy. It has to go with Harold. So that's where it started. And Harold pushed it, and it made it happen. I was in the background. I used to run the public walks. Harold would be there. He would hand it off to me. Joe had a heavy accent, so I had to mine him like an interview to get the information that people needed. But it's special to me.
Well, I think for us, I think just thank you for your commitment to the city, your passion for the city, but also those years that you were spent, helping steer the ship for the city. We're better for it. The city has grown tremendously, is growing tremendously. It's not, again, not an end product yet. But your perspective on that change and the challenges and opportunities that the city has faced and will face. I do appreciate that perspective and the fact that you're so willing to chat with us about it and offer your insights. I do appreciate it. So thank you so very much for spending some time and wandering down memory lane on our Moments and Milestones program here. And happy 50th to you for the city and as a resident, and to the next 50 that come down the road. Thank you for spending some time with us here, and thank you also to former long-serving Councillor Dave Culham for sharing his memories, moments, and milestones with us for the City of Mississauga's 50th anniversary. Like, subscribe, and follow us, and we will see you on future episodes of Ask a Historian with Heritage Mississauga.